Welcome to the Innovation Conversation, a podcast about innovators, both in business and real life. Hosted by myself, Ricardo Pascual, and Harry McDonough. Today's episode is sponsored by Hyperskill. Hyperskill is a learning and training platform that enables people from all over the world to learn new tech skills. If you're looking to learn new tech skills, this is a platform to choose. You can find out more about them on hyperskill.org. Today, we are joined by Sam Simpson from Founders Catalystto. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today, we are joined by Sam Simpson from Founders Catalystto. Sam, welcome.
Hi, Ricardo. Good morning.
Good morning. So tell us all about yourself and Founders Catalystto. Introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Sam Simpson. I'm CEO. Or co-founder. I think co-founder is probably more fitting of the Founder Catalyst. So by intro, I'm an exited founder. I became an accidental entrepreneur a few years ago, started a company, and then that grew from 0 to 27 million in 4 years. And I exited to private equity. I'm an angel investor as well, and CEO of Founder Catalyst. We do a few things. So firstly, we offer a whole bunch of free resources on our website, stuff for founders that, virtually every founder needs at an early stage but can't afford to pay for. Secondly, we help people get SEIS, EIS advanced assurance, which are SEIS and EIS are amazing tax relief schemes in the UK, and they're a game changer. If you're trying to raise in the UK, they're essential and you need to know about them. We do legal funding around paperwork, and we make intros between our customers and potential sources of funding.
Quite a lot. You're really the go-to company for any startup in the UK, really.
I'd like to think so, yeah.
Because the range of services you offer is I don't think any startup can actually launch their business without going through one of your services. There's just no way around that, right? Especially the SEIS and EIS. On that topic, I was going to ask you, how did you get started? I mean, what was the motivation to start the company?
So my journey was not straightforward. I never intended to be an entrepreneur. I started out my career as a technologist. So I'm a reformed geek, so degree in computer science and those kind of things. Spent years and years and years delivering technical solutions. Delivered £100 million project for a secure government customer. And ultimately, I worked for the same company for 15 years happily. I went from being the most junior engineer up to tech director. And then, it was a really fun journey until January 2013. That business disappeared literally overnight. So they were a private equity backed, bank debt laden business that they'd bought a dozen different companies over 15 years, loads of debt, and bolted them together with the aim of building kind of a huge business. Unfortunately, they overextended and that business literally disappeared overnight, which is amazing. I mean, it had 2,500 employees. It had nearly $500 million in revenues. It's just a ridiculous story, really. That business disappeared overnight and I found myself unemployed at the end of January. And it was eye-opening. It was absolutely brutal. Because of the way the company was run, at the end of January, the liquidators were called in, the administrators, and they said to every employee, there's no pay for January. Bearing in mind it's the 28th of January. You're not getting paid. There's no redundancy pay, no pay in lieu of notice. We're not paying your expenses or bonuses or anything like that. Basically, they threw us out on the street with no money, which was pretty harsh for 2,500 people. I kind of decided to take my destiny in my own hand. I'd always worked on the basis that, if you do the right thing in a job and, you'll keep getting promoted and life will be good. That turned out not to be the case for me. So I started my own company, hence why I became an accidental entrepreneur. And that business did really well. We did $500,000 in our first 2 months, $5 million in our first year, and then grew to nearly 30 million in about 3.5 years. Now, my co-founders wanted to do a buy and build, so borrow loads of bank debt and take on PE cash to buy businesses and bolt them together. Mm-hmm. If you were listening at the start of that story, I'd been through that and it didn't end too well for me. So I shook hands with my co-founders and, wished them well with their journey. But I exited with a wheelbarrow full of cash then. Now, anybody that knows me knows I'm really, really passionate about SEIS and EIS, the tax relief schemes, and hopefully we'll get to talk more about the benefits of those in a minute. But actually, I invested in my own business under EIS. So when I came to exit, it saved me and my co-founders genuinely millions in capital gains tax on an exit. So funny enough, once I'd exited, I was a massive fan of SEIS, EIS. I'm like, right, how else can I use this magical tax relief? So I started angel investing at the start of 2018. Over the last 6 years, I've got 32 investments and about $750,000 deployed. And there is a point to this story. Sorry, Ricardo. But I kept bumping into loads of founders at pitch events. There's a really lovely example. I met a guy who had a PhD in AI. He was a hedge fund trader, a part-time lecturer in UCL, and he had in his spare time built AI software to do commodities forecasting using AI. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that is investor bingo right there. I think I literally threw my checkbook across the room at him. Anyway, I heard him pitch and he was just absolutely amazing. He had 3 amazing customers lined up to trial his software, and he had a team ready to go. All he needed was a little seed capital to get going. Yeah. So I took him for a drink afterwards and I asked him the usual investor questions. Do you have a term sheet? Have you got SEIS, EIS, advance assurance? What's your pre-money valuation? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm going to stop you there. I've got no idea what you're talking about. I just don't understand how this game's played. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This guy is if he doesn't understand how to play the game, then nobody does. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I helped him do his funding round. I mean, that was ridiculously easy to close, but I rolled up my sleeves and helped him close his funding round. And I invested myself because he is the most investable founder that I'd ever met. And that story was repeated a few times. I bumped into people, didn't know what they were doing, helped them close the funding round. And I thought, actually, I don't scale. I love working with people. I love working with entrepreneurs, but I can only help one person at a time because it's actually really time consuming. So I started Founder Catalystto to scratch that itch, which is a way that can help people in the same way I helped Tristan back in the day, can help people do funding rounds, but using technology to take the heavy lifting out of the way.
Yeah, because SEIS, so if you want to tell our audience a bit more about SEIS, because they are a lot of early stage founders amongst the audience, what exactly is it and why is it so important? Because I don't think people fully realize how massive it is and how big of a help it is, both for their business and also for the investors. So if you want to explain a bit more about that to the audience.
Yeah, for sure. So there are 2 schemes, SEIS and EIS. SEIS is Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, and EIS, which is the big sister, if you like, is just Enterprise Investment Scheme. SEIS is it's usually used for first funding rounds, so first 250K, very early stage, and then people move on to EIS after that, when they've either used all their SEIS or they're out of time. Let's focus on what SEIS does first. And it's worth mentioning, both of these schemes are tax relief schemes just for the investor. So there is no direct benefit to the founder at all, or the startup. There's no tax relief or anything. So lots of founders kind of go, well, why do I care? Well, the answer is if, there are thousands of businesses out there offering amazing tax relief scheme to investors, and we'll come on to that in a minute. If you're not also offering the same tax relief, then, investors just aren't going to be interested in your business. There's a second soft benefit to founders as well. So SEIS and EIS is really prescriptive about the rights and protections that I can request as an investor. So I'm not allowed to have things like liquidation preferences or anti-dilution or no dilution and things like that. Now, you may not know what those terms mean, but let's put it this way. They are very investor friendly and therefore very founder unfriendly terms. So if you're a founder looking to raise money, you want the most founder friendly terms you can possibly get, certainly at an early stage anyway, but at any stage really. And SEIS and EIS mandate that, investors can't ask for those really punchy VC type terms. So that's another soft benefit for you as a founder. Anyway, let's cut to the chase and talk about the tax benefit for investors, which is the primary cause. So, let me give you an example. If I put £10,000 into a startup under SEIS, then the government gives me back 50% income tax relief almost immediately with some caveats. So I put 10 grand in, the government gives me £5,000 back against tax I've already paid, which is genuinely amazing, right? It's just that is on its own good enough for most investors, but there are 3 other benefits that I'm going to talk through as well. The second benefit is capital gains tax exemption. So if I invest in your business, I've already had half my cash back. But when I come to exit, if you imagine you turn my £10,000 into £1 million after 3 years, so 100 times return, as long as the business and everything continues to follow the scheme rules, then on an exit, I don't pay a penny in tax on that increase in value. Now, normally I would pay 20% of the £990,000 profit, if you like. But under SEIS and EIS, there's no capital gains tax to pay at all. So it's totally CGT exempt. And that's what I benefited from in my business. I invested a relatively modest sum up front, and then when I exited for many millions, I didn't pay a single penny in capital gains tax. It's genuinely amazing. The third benefit isn't quite so cheery, I'm afraid, but it's inheritance tax relief. So if I invest in your business, I've put my £10,000 in, I've had half of it back already. If I die after 2 years of holding your shares, I did warn you it wasn't cheery, then the shares pass to my estate outside of an inheritance tax calculation. So they are free of inheritance tax entirely, which is, again, a massive, massive tax saving for your for the beneficiaries of your estate. And those beneficiaries pick up the share and they don't pay CGT on an exit as well. So it's kind of a triple relief in that case, even though it's a pretty sad scenario. The final relief is something called loss relief. So the reality is investors know that 7 out of 10 startups will fail for whatever reason. There's lots and lots of reasons. And there's another relief called loss relief. So imagine I've invested 10K, I've got 5K back. If the business fails for whatever reason, and this doesn't have to be after 3 years, it can be after 6 months or whatever, then the government will give me back another 22%, depending on my prevailing personal tax position. They'll give me back another 22% of my cash, or another 2,200 quid. So actually, out of my 10K, I'm risking £2,800 up once all of the tax relief, with no CGT on a positive exit. It's genuinely amazing. EIS is the big sister scheme. I won't bore everybody with the same example, but you can raise much more over a longer period, but the tax reliefs are less. So under EIS, if I put 10K in, I only get £3,000, £3,000 or 30% back. The capital gains tax and inheritance tax exemptions are identical, which is great. And the loss relief is proportionally less as well.
Interesting. I guess, let's be honest, these are massive advantages for both the startup and investor. How impactful do you think they are in the ecosystem?
They're huge. I can't even imagine what the angel investment space in the UK would look like without those schemes. It would be a very, very, very different place. And, I think SEIS specifically, but EIS to some extent as well, getting a business off the ground is hard, and lots of founders bootstrap, can afford to bootstrap with a couple of £1,000 so they can incorporate and register a name and a trademark, do all of those kind of things. But there's such a massive gap between that point there and either reaching profitability and revenue, or reaching a point where you are attractive to VCs, for example. There's a massive funding gap, and SEIS and to some extent EIS just really clearly fill that gap and give people that early stage, massive risk capital that takes them to the point where, they've either proved something, they've either released a product, they've got an MVP, or even better, they've got revenue, and therefore they're attractive to later stage investors. And these schemes, these schemes are genuinely the best in the world. I'm not aware of any country that has equivalent schemes. And even France recently have announced that they are introducing very similar schemes with very similar tax reliefs to similarly, incentivize their investors as well.
I was just, because I read the news quite recently, and they said that there's going to be a change in the way this scheme allows people to invest in. Can you share some more information about this? Because they said apparently only accredited investors to now invest in startups. Is that actually going to go ahead, or are they going to stop that?
So that's not actually a change to the schemes at all. There's a nuance here. I don't want to split hairs, but the distinction is important. So last April, they changed the rules, and they raised SEIS from 150 to £250,000 maximum investment. They changed it from 2 years from the date you start to trade to 3 years. So there are a few polishes last year, and all of those changes were absolutely positive. So that's all good. The changes that you're referring to are the changes that came into they came into existence on the 31st of January this year, and these are much less positive. But they're not actually changes to the SEIS and EIS scheme. They're changes to the FCA financial promotion rules. And there are existing set of rules already that say you need to be either a high net worth or a sophisticated investor in order to be shown a financial promotion. And what the Financial Conduct Authority, what the government's done actually, because it's a piece of legislation that's implemented this. So it's the FCA recommending to the government and the government making a change. But what they've done recently is changed some of the rules around both the sophisticated and the high net worth investors. To give you an example, the old rules were to be considered a high net worth as one of the example exemptions. You had to earn at least £100,000 a year, which is quite a lot. But that £100,000 has been the same since I think it's 2003 or 2005. I forget. But that amount has been unchanged for a couple of decades, and the FCA argued that actually over time and given inflation, that amount should be much more. So what they've done, there's a Bank of England calculation. You can run the calculator on the Bank of England site that shows that, 100,000 back in, I think it's 2003. 20 years later, that 100,000 is 170,000. So the FCA argued that £100,000 high net worth limit should jump up to £170,000. So I get the logic. The logic is absolutely sound, but that has a massive and disproportionate impact to diverse founders and female founders. Diverse investors and female investors specifically. And there's a really interesting statistic, for example, and I'm going to mix up my geographies, but the whole of Northern Ireland and I think it's the northwest of England, those two geographies don't have a single female investor that meet the £170,000 requirement. Now,
crazy.
Now we can talk about the wage disparity between male and female and diverse workers. That's a totally different conversation. But the implications of this change mean that there will be a dramatic reduction in the number of female investors specifically, causing another problem where female investors invest more in female founders than male investors do, if that makes sense. So this change will massively impact female investors, which will then have a massive knock-on impact to female founders. And I think it was, at a time where the government's pushing, they've increased the SEIS limits. Everybody is doing a really great job about, promoting female founders and trying to make it a much more level playing field. UKBAA they're really championing this cause. And on the other hand, the FCA are increasing the rules to massively decrease the number of female investors in the UK via these rule changes. It's a bit perverse, really.
Yeah, it kind of skews the market a bit, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah.
I was just about to ask you, what do you think are the biggest challenges? Because you meet a lot of founders. I know you go to a lot of events, ours included. You just did an amazing presentation in our last one on Tuesday. But what do you think are the main, challenges that founders face, or the main things? If you could just give them one piece of advice, what would that be? Just say, look, don't fall on these mistakes, because they do happen to everyone.
God, such an interesting question with so many answers. I'm going to give two pieces of advice. So the first piece of advice is, don't try and do a funding round ill prepared. So don't go and speak to investors and hope for the best. As a really bonkers example, I had a message a few weeks ago from somebody saying, "Will you invest in my business?" I'm like, I always listen to people, and I'm intrigued to hear new ideas. So I requested a copy of the pitch deck, and they went, "Oh, I don't have a pitch deck yet. Can I just talk to you?" I'm like, no, that's bonkers. So, that is absolutely ill prepared for a funding round. So what do I mean by being prepared for a funding round? So the four basic things you need are pitch deck, forecast, you need your advance assurance, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And you need a term sheet explaining what the rules, what the deal on offer is. Now, there are other things you can prepare, like a data room, your disclosures against the warranties, you can have valuation justifications and lots of things like that. But the four key things that any investor in the UK will be looking for are those documents. And an advance assurance, I've introduced a new phrase there that I should probably introduce.
Please, yes, I'm curious about that one.
Yeah, I don't want people leaving going, well, what is he on about? So SEIS and EIS are the tax schemes. I think I've explained those to death. In order to prove that as a founder, in order to prove that your investment opportunity is eligible under the SEIS and EIS scheme, there's a process that HMRC offer called advance assurance. So effectively, you build a submission pack to HMRC containing lots of information about your company, some of your legal documents and things like that. HMRC review it and they send you an email back saying, based upon everything you've given us and, the rules as they are today, we believe we'll be able to issue SEIS and EIS certificates to your investors in due course. So, it's a really important piece of paper to be able to waive at your investors. And that's one of the services we offer at Founder Catalyst because it is so fundamentally important to investors seeing that advance assurance.
How long does it take to get that normally?
We've automated the living daylights out of the process. So we can, we got a lovely testimonial from a few weeks ago where somebody signed up as a customer at midday, say, and an hour later we'd submitted their advance assurance for them. In terms of the HMRC response, we don't have much sway over that. Unfortunately, it is what it is. The best we've ever seen is next working day, next business day. And we've had that maybe 1% of the time we get that. One of these days I'm hoping for same day response, but I'll keep dreaming. The average is about 10 working days. So it's about two weeks.
So would you advise a founder to first get these things sorted? Or you can just tell them, look, just try and get an investor. And then when you do get the investor, you just apply for all the documentation.
Yeah, no, don't do that. You should have those 4 things in place before you speak to investors, because otherwise you just don't look prepared to do a funding round. You don't look like you've got your ducks in a row. And, with my investor hat on, if somebody comes to me and they've got a pitch deck, but none of the other things, then, that makes me concerned about how prepared they are for a funding round. But also it makes me prepared about how prepared they are for the rest of the journey as well. If you're not getting the basics in place, what else aren't you doing? Have you got ICO registration and insurance and all of those kind of things? It's just not a great look. Whereas if you're a founder and you come to me as an investor and you go, right, these are the 4 documents you need. This is my data room ready to go. If you make it easy for me, I'm like, okay, this founder's, they've got their ducks in a row.
And when people start getting investors, what do you think is the best strategy to go about? Because you invest yourself as well. So how do you even get started, but also how to get more investors once you manage to convince a single one saying, hey, here's a great idea. Would you like to invest in? And say yes.
So, finding investors is the big challenge. To be honest, preparing for a funding round is the easy bit. We do lots of it. And, there are great ways of producing pitch decks and, so getting your ducks in a row is easy. Actually getting in front of the investors is very, very hard. And there are lots of options. There are, you can go and try and find individual investors and you can find lists of investors and you can stalk them on LinkedIn and you can automate the messaging and things like that. That's one way. You can go to private equity club and angel networks. And I'll come back to that one actually, because for me, that is the optimal way of raising. You can list yourself on some amazing free platforms. So second shout out to UK BAA here, but they offer a platform called DealShare where founders can list their funding opportunity. I love it for 2 reasons. So firstly, it gets your opportunity in front of 15,000 active angels in the UK. And secondly, it's absolutely free. So no charge to list, no charge if you raise via that DealShare platform. Barclays Eagle Labs offer a very similar platform as well. So it's absolutely worth looking at that. Other options include, going to SEIS funds and EIS funds. There are some junior VCs that maybe play in the space you're interested in. And there are, crowdfunders, there are brokers that can help you. So there are lots and lots of options. Mm-hmm. For me, to be honest, the optimal is to go to private equity club and angel networks. And because there's a time cost trade-off here. If you're trying to chase, and I'm not going to try and do the mental maths here, but if you're trying to chase individual investors in the UK for investment, assuming you've got a 1 in 20 hit rate, so, one out of every 20 investors you speak to is going to invest in your business. Assume you're raising 250 and assuming the average ticket size is about 25k, which it probably is. So you need to find 10 investors. You're only going to find those by speaking, only 1 in 20 people. So you can do the match. You're going to need to speak to 200 people individually to pitch in order to get your 10 investors at 25k each. That's a lot of time. And I mean, on the bright side, you'd be very polished at your pitch by the end of it. But it's just a huge distraction. It's a full-time job pitching to 200 people. That's really bad. So for me, if I were a founder, I would speak to private equity club and angel networks. There are about 100, 130 in the UK. There's a lovely map, actually. I'll share with you afterwards, Ricardo. There's a lovely interactive map showing every angel club within the UK on a Google map.
That is very useful because it's not that it's hard to find, but it's hard to find sources that don't want to charge you for that. So
yeah. And actually, most angel clubs have a preference for investing in their own geography, right? So, if your angel investors, Bristol, for example, which is one of my favourite clubs, they have a very strong preference for investing in the Southwest. That doesn't mean they won't look at people off patch, but it's just harder. So the benefit of going to those private equity club and angel networks is you get in front of 30, 50, 100 people in one go. So you're not pitching to individual people. And that will hopefully massively save your time. Usually people have to pitch to, unless you've got something dramatically wrong, 3 or 4 angel groups, and then you should hopefully close your funding round. Mm-hmm. There is a downside to that. So there's a couple of downsides. Firstly, it's not the quickest process. So you have to apply online. You have to wait until there's a slot free. Sometimes there's onboarding. So it can take a couple of months to get in front of people. And secondly, there's a fee. So you will have to pay, usually it's between 5 and 7% of any investment you raise via the club, you pay as a success fee. But at that point, you're trading off your time pitching to hundreds of people versus 5% fee for raising. And for me, that's absolutely a trade-off that's worthwhile.
But that's a common fee, isn't it? Because sometimes I talk with people who make introductions, and they all say, "Look, normal fee is 5%." So if you're trying to raise, and if they have the ability to give you all the money you need, you end up saving time, I guess, time and money, right? Because they do pretty much all the work for you. All you need to do is deliver a good pitch, and that's about it.
That's it. And again, it's a trade-off of time and cost. Now, and there's no right answer here. If you're a founder with loads of time on your hands and you love pitching and then you can avoid the 5% and you can do 200 pitches, say. Personally, I wouldn't be running to do that. But it's, there's no right or wrong answer. And we've got lots, and Founder Catalyst has, hundreds of customers that have raised, without paying anybody a fee at all, just by rolling their sleeves up and hustling.
I was just about to ask you, how hard is it for someone with not a lot of capital to actually go and raise funds? But I guess you just answered the question, which is you can actually do that. So you don't need to have a lot of capital at your disposal to start the journey.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm probably going to do myself out of some business here, but let me kind of explain. If I were a absolutely cash-strapped founder, how I would start a business. So you can incorporate for 10 or 15 quid. That is trivial. You can find a friendly accountant that will let you use their office as long as you use them for the filings and stuff like that. You can use their office as a registered office, so you're not putting your home address on company's house, which is tip number 1, right? You can produce a pitch fee. You can produce your pitch deck. Lots of people do it for free, and there are online. There are online services like pitch.space that allow you to build a very good pitch deck for £100. It's fixed fee. You get a downloadable PowerPoint, so you can do that for £100. You can do advance assurance yourself. It's not impossible. I speak to lots of founders that do that for free. It's not without risk, and there is a 20% failure your failure rate according to HMRC, but it's possible. You can get a term sheet for absolutely free from our website without paying a penny. And we offer a minimum viable forecast model as well, which you can download. So right there, you've got 4 things. You've got the 4 basics that you need in place to speak to investors. And it's, you can probably do that for a couple of £100.
Interesting. How are you finding the ecosystem right now? Do you think it's hard for people? Let me rephrase that. Not that it's hard for people to raise money, but do you think people are not investing as much as they would a couple of years ago? or money is still flowing and deals are still happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing like it was in 2021, that's for sure. I think, there has been a dramatic change in the landscape, which has a few implications. So, it's a double-edged sword, this one, but actually the early stage, so the SEIS and early stage EIS funding rounds that I've spoken about early, have weathered the storm relatively well. And they've done that because if you look at there's a company called Bowhurst that you're probably familiar with, Ricardo, but if anybody listens to this isn't familiar with it, they should get to bowhurst.com. That is for absolute certain. Now, Bowhurst track every funding round in the UK. They look at every funding round and they have some amazing statistics. So it is because of Bowhurst, I can tell you that, the average funding round, pre-seed, pre-revenue. So first funding round is 1.5 million valuation and a 250k raise. And I know that because Bowhurst published the figures, which is amazing. They produce some quarterly, half-year and yearly reports, which show the state of the nation in terms of the investment landscape. And they've got some they're not lovely, actually, they're dramatic. They've got some great graphs which show the levels of funding by the maturity of a business. So pre-seed, seed, bridge, Series A, Series B and onwards. And you can see over the last, before 2021, there are dramatic growths in, Series A onwards. So, the bulk, there's an amazing statistic, like the amount of funding that's gone into the ecosystem has tripled in the last 5 years. But if you look at where that's deployed, it's disproportionately deployed at the high end. So it's massive VCs deploying tens or hundreds of millions of pounds into Series B, C and D. The amount of money that's gone into investment at an angel level, it's increased, but nowhere near as dramatically. It hasn't increased anywhere near as much as Series A onwards. And what's interesting is the collapse we've seen over the last 2 years has disproportionately impacted those Series A onwards as well. So if you're a later stage business relying on Series A onwards funding, it's really painful. It's really, really, really horrible out there. And for lots of reasons. But yeah, that money has been disproportionately hit. But it will also disproportionately lifted in the first place. Whereas if you look at the growth pre-seed level, for example, or a seed level, the growth was less dramatic, and therefore the drop-off has also been less dramatic. And the reality, if you're raising under SEIS, there are still lots of people like me who have a tax bill to pay, and there are, I don't like paying tax, nobody does. So I use SEIS to offset that, and that hasn't changed at all.
Do you think there's anything that institutionally can be done to change this landscape? Is there any, we talk a lot about the SEIS and EIS scheme, but do you think there's anything else the government can do and just say, look, this is really going to be a game changer? Like, if you had a magic wand, what would you try and fix?
It's a really tough question, and it's hard to answer because, at a government level, like I say, SEIS and EIS are the best schemes in the world, I'm sure, and they're already doing a lot. If I had a magic wand and I could change two things, so the first is I would change the high net worth rules back to what they were before, or make it actually even easier for female investors to invest and diverse investors, because that helps the rest of the female and diverse ecosystem. So I would do that. And there is a really weird argument, which is, I can take 100 grand out of my bank today, go to a casino and spend that 100 grand. And I could do the same tomorrow, the day after. Nobody would stop me from doing that unless I started winning and I think I'd get thrown out the casino. There's no chance of that. But yeah, there are no rules in place about me doing that as a person, but I'm not allowed to angel invest, even with the amazing tax benefits. It's just a really weird. So yeah, my first wave of the wand would be to fix that. And secondly, one of the frustrations I have in the UK is the ecosystem is so fragmented. So if, I've already said that if I were raising, I would go to the private equity club and angel networks because it's a time cost trade-off. But it is still much, much more painful than it needs to be. There are 100 groups in the UK, and there is absolutely no joined up nature between those groups. So if I want to apply to all 100, guess what I need to do? I need to find them, and I'll share the interactive map later. That's just genuinely amazing. Every single one of those has a very different way of applying those. So I have to find the website. I have to answer 100 different questions to every group because they've got different questions in every way. I've got to work out their website. I've got to check I meet their investment criteria. Yeah, it's just really, really painful. And what's, that's part one of that frustration. The second frustration, so imagine I go to one of the angel groups. I'm raising £500,000, for example's sake, and that angel group goes, right, we're going to put £150,000 in. It is in everybody's interest, including that angels group, for them to introduce me to other groups and say, we've already committed 150 here. You can make use of our due diligence. Yeah. We've already kicked the tires and we love it. So we think you should, benefit from the same research and things. And they should be making introductions so that other people, to fill that funding round, which is good for them. It's good for their investors and it's good for the founders. None of that happens. You pitch to a group, they go, we'll put in 150 grand as long as you find the other 350 grand. And then you're back to square one. You're kind of doing the dog and pony show around every group. It is genuinely ridiculous that there is no way of joining up all of those groups. It's just mad.
So for everyone listening and searching, yeah, there you go. There's a good business idea right there.
There is absolutely. And yeah.
Do you think, because a lot of people talk about this, but do you think that, for example, when compared with the States, are funding rounds generally a lot smaller in the UK? And if so, why does that happen? Not really.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Absolutely undoubtedly. And one of my heart sinks where I speak to a founder in the UK and go, yeah, I spotted this funding round in America. They've just raised $3 million on a SAFE on a 15 million valuation. I'm going to do the same here. And you need to sit them down and go, there, I love your ideas. It's not happening, by the way. I mentioned the statistics earlier. So, we play in a different market. We've got much smaller investors. We don't have the same VC ecosystem. And one of my, God, if I had a third one, wave of the wand, I would fix this as well, because VCs in the UK claim, oh, great, we're, pre-seed, pre-revenue. And then when you talk to them, they go, well, actually, you need, 70k MRR in order for us to consider you pre-seed. And you're like, well, that's not really pre-seed, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
So, whereas in America, there are genuinely pre-seed VCs that go down. So, they will invest in pre-revenue companies. In the UK, there are a few exceptions, specifically if you're kind of in deep tech or whatever. But usually VCs will only come in, once you've got that very strong traction. Yeah, and the reality, and for any founder watching this, the reality is the UK and the US ecosystem are very different. You're going to raise much, much less here at a much lower valuation, and that's just the way the game's played.
Would you advise anyone to actually go on a flight all the way to California or New York or Texas or wherever it might be and say, hey, would you guys like to invest in me? Would you advise anyone to try and do that?
There are, no, probably not. And I know some people have successfully, but no, probably not. So if you're speaking to American investors, they're not going to be able to make use of SEIS, EIS. They love investing in people and they probably want you to live in the same, at least in the same country, if not the same state or town. And yeah, there are lots of reasons why, there are, don't get me wrong, there are American investors that have invested in the UK, but it is very rare. And you're not making use of those amazing tax breaks. Now, one of probably my favorite investment ever is a company called Skin Analytics. They do melanoma detection using a smartphone and AI. The founder is just amazing, and they've been on such an amazing journey over the last 10 plus years. The founder actually went to America for his Series A. So he found an American investor who's going to put a couple of million in. And as part of that, he had to relocate to America in order to be local to the VCs and blah, blah, blah. So, that's kind of the way the game's played. So you can do it if you're willing to potentially, lift your family up and move them to America and things like that. But those investments are only are only practical when you're at that later stage.
I have a very, very controversial question.
Oh dear.
Which is how to actually do evaluation. Because if I Google this now, I'm going to find 10 different answers, all completely different calculations. So how do you actually get started? From your experience, what do you think is the best method to actually evaluate your company if you're pre-seed, for example? Yeah,
probably the most common question I get asked these days, actually. And it's very emotive because founders are like, oh, my company's worth £3 million. And you're like, okay, what is the basis for that? So I will give you a bonkers example. And if I forget, please remind me. The reality is when you're later stage, when you've got revenue and profit, even better, there are, very, very tried and tested ways of valuing your business. So when I exited my business, you take, what's your EBIT? You know what that number is. You can argue about add backs and take away and, what the underlying EBIT is on an adjusted basis. But one way or another, you're going to come to an agreement on that number. And then there's a multiple. And, BDO have a list of sector-based multiples, for example. And you can tell that an IT company typically gets, if they're average, they'll get a 10 times EBIT multiple. So you take one, times it by the other, that's how much your business is worth. Give or take, you can negotiate both those numbers, but it's there or thereabouts. If you're really lucky and you've got a SaaS business or a massively annuity-heavy business, you might get revenue times a multiple as well. So you'll get a 3 times your revenue number. But, there's proper science behind that. You can debate both the numbers, but it's just a multiply sign in the middle. When you are earlier stage, but you're making revenue, there are discounted cash flow and VC methods. And we've got some calculators on our site you can use for free. You can download those and try them. If you're pre-seed and pre-revenue, though, none of that works. You can't use DCF. You can't reasonably use VC. You certainly can't multiply your EBIT times nothing your EBIT by a multiple because you've got 0 times 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
Your business is worthless, which is a problem. So there are 2 methods that are useful, and I'll combine them into one for ease of conversation. There are 2 methods that are used at an early stage. One's called scorecard and one's called the Berkus method. And both of these, can be used in pre-seed, pre-revenue. Let me explain how I would use those methodologies because it's how I approach every single business that I look at. Typically, I'm a pre-revenue investor. So how do you start? Where do you start from? You start from the Bowhurst averages. So you say, what is the average? You look at the latest Bowhurst figures. What is the average pre-seed, pre-revenue valuation, pre-money valuation? And the answer is now roughly 1.4, 1.5 million. And that is what it is. And then you apply a bunch of, you sanity check that number against how attractive or not the business is by a number of metrics. And this is where it becomes very personal to the investor because actually what I think is important in a business is probably not the same as the next investment. There are different kind of ratings and criteria and weightings and things. For example, I think by far the most important thing in a business for an early stage is team. So I will look at the team first and, so I've got my basic of 1.5 million here. If the team has multiple exited founders, somebody with a PhD, it's got a well-rounded team of 3 where they've got somebody who's the techie, somebody who's the business brains and, somebody who's going to slog on the phones and sell things. Well, great. You've got 3 people. You've got a perfect team. You'd probably add $500,000 to the valuation at that point, all things being equal. If you've got a sole founder, never built a business before, blah, 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 you may take 100 or 200,000 off of the 1.5 million. You then look at, the defensibility, for example, as the next thing. You say, right, have they got patents in their idea? Is there some secret source or know-how? Or is it just a Me Too business? Is it just something that anybody else could copy with no defensibility? If it's got, somebody's got a PhD in the subject and a patent and, you may add, another couple of £100,000. Mm-hmm. If you're making something that is eminently copyable, you'll maybe knock another 100 or a couple of hundred. And you do this through all of the key criteria that's important to me as an investor. And ultimately, I'll come up with a number. And maybe the number will be just over 2 million quid, or maybe the number will be just under £1 million. It's very unusual. Yeah, it would be very unusual for me to consider investing something pre-seed, pre-revenue if it goes much above 2 million. And the maths don't really work out that well if it goes, below 800,000 or whatever. So let me give you a bonkers example of how how this game shouldn't be played. So there was a founder who used an accountant to come up with a valuation. The accountant should be struck off probably, but they did 3 different valuation methods. They did even though the company is pre-seed, pre-revenue, and 2 of these valuations don't make any sense, they did a scorecard method, which came up with a valuation of about 1.4 million. which is probably where the business should have been. It wasn't, I wouldn't have invested in it anyway, but that's probably okay. The other method was DCF, and that came up with a valuation of about 350 million. Now, do you see the difference between 1.5 and 350 million?
It's a big difference, yeah.
Yeah. They then did a VC method, which I think was even more bonkers. It was, 400 million or something like that.
1.4 to 400 million, that's big.
Yeah, 1.5, 350 million, 400 million. Now, anybody with any common sense would look at that and say, actually, there's something dramatically wrong here because there's such a big difference between the three numbers. Anyway, the accountant didn't do that. He did a weighted average between the three numbers. He did a 20-40-40 split, actually, which doesn't make it any better. And the valuation came out at about 200 million. Now, yeah, needless to say, he didn't get funded. And the reality is, a good sanity check would have been, what does normal look like according to Bowhurst? Even with a little, even if he thought his business was better than that, he shouldn't have gone much more above 2 million. And one of the things we do in Founder Catalyst, every time we speak to customers, we say, what are you raising? What's your valuation? And we sanity check that. And it's actually quite difficult because, the conversation you have is telling people why they're not going to raise what they want at the valuation they want, and just bring people back to what market standard looks like.
Do you think it's a good indicator for an investor to look at a founder, and if they come up with a crazy valuation, like you just mentioned, and just say, you know what, you're so out of touch with reality and the facts and figures we look at that I'm not even going to spend my time looking at it because it just doesn't make any sense. Do you think that's...
Yeah, I mean, what you want when you're speaking to a founder, you are checking that they are, sensible, bright. They're going to do the right thing whilst building the business while nobody's looking. If you've got somebody who genuinely thinks their business worth 200 million quid when the average is 1.5, yeah, it's not a great look. And I would just walk away in that example, you would just run for the hills. Now, there is a slight nuance to this as well, where even if you're not quite as ridiculous as 1.5 to 200 million, that is mad. But even if you are, and I see lots of founders falling for this one. Imagine, your valuation should be about 1.5 million, but you kind of like, well, I'm going to make it 4 million and see what happens. There's a really good analogy I use with when I'm going to buy a car. So if I want to spend, £50,000 on a car, I'll walk into the garage. If there's a car for £60,000, I might try and negotiate and beat them up, and maybe I'll get to 53 and everybody's happy or whatever. If there's a car for 200k sat on the lot, I'm just not going to look at it. I'm not going to test drive it. I'm just going to completely, I'm going to walk away from that immediately. And the same analogy kind of works for startups. If I see somebody who I think should be valued at 1.5 with a 4 million valuation, I'm just going to go, well, there's no point having the conversation because, there's just such a big gap to breach. Now, actually, the founder will probably, unfortunately for them, find out that their valuation should be about 1.5 million. But by that point, hundreds of investors have walked away because it's just so out of kilter.
It's funny you use the car analogy because it's the same thing whenever you have someone selling their car. They always assume they're selling, the top-end Ferrari.
Yeah.
In reality, they're probably selling, a Vauxhall or something like that, a Vauxhall Corsa. It doesn't look like a Ferrari. It's not a Ferrari. But yeah, it's a tricky one. Sam, as we're closing, and I think we can actually talk for days about all these things, but as we're closing the end of this episode, if people want to reach out to you and find you, where can they do so?
So, foundercatalyst.com is our website. I'm on LinkedIn. I love connecting, love talking about all things startups. So connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find there's a Calendly link there. So if you want to book a meeting and discuss your £200 million valuation as a founder, then do that as well. It's worth mentioning. So something I'm really, really proud of, probably, and sometimes you start something that you think is going to fizzle and not work out, and it actually works much better than you think. But within the Founder Catalyst family, we've got a WhatsApp community, which sounds daft actually, but it's got well over 200 founders on it now. And it's just such a lovely community where everybody there can ask questions on, if it's fundraising, then great, we'll, provide support and guidance. But, they're asking each other has anybody heard of this investor, or does anybody know an accountant that specializes in R&D tax credits, or does anybody know developer in Lithuania or whatever it is. You can ask any question because there's so many people on the group and everybody kind of rolls their sleeves up and helps each other. You'll get sensible answers. So, we'd love people to come and join that as well as founders.
How can people join that community?
Become a customer. So sign up to Founder Catalyst, create an account. As you onboard for an account, there's you enter your mobile number and indicate you want to sign up to that community.
Thank you, Sam. That's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you because we're actually going to run a course together on how to build your business in 6 weeks. So if anyone listening wants to listen to Sam and get his advice and expertise, make sure to sign up for that. And Sam, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Ricardo.